Tonight, Campaign 2024. Former President Trump hits Iowa on the heels of his top contender.
This is not a lost cause. Yes, we're behind. We've got a lot to do, but we can do it.
Plus, done deal? The debt limit deal lands in the Senate, but will it hit any snags before heading to the president's desk?
No one on either side would call this agreement perfect.
And the Ostrich strategy.
They never go on offense on this issue. They tend to hide from it.
Why some GOP presidential contenders are hiding their heads in the sand on the abortion issue.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The race for the White House is off and running, and the trail is starting to get crowded. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder.
And from Washington, I'm John Jessup. Thanks for joining us for Faith Nation. The 2024 primary campaign is ramping up more than 500 days away from next year's presidential election, with GOP hopefuls already barnstorming early voting states like Iowa and New Hampshire.
Former President Trump holds a strong early lead in the polls, but is also hitting the campaign trail as more candidates jump in. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson has our top story tonight and the latest on the race. Abigail?
Well, Jenna, now that candidates like Senator Tim Scott and Governor Ron DeSantis are officially in the race, they're kicking off their campaigns with jam-packed schedules in hopes of drumming up much-needed support to contend against President Trump.
This country is going in the wrong direction.
This week alone, Governor DeSantis is campaigning in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina.
We're going to reverse Biden's destructive economic policies. We're going to get this economy back towards focusing on what's good for hardworking Americans and for small business. I'm so sick of big business doing so well and small businesses struggling.
The latest Morning Consult poll has former President Trump leading the pack of GOP hopefuls by 56%. A 34-point lead over the closest contender, Governor DeSantis.
Ron, as I call him, Ron DeSanctimonious for reasons. But Ron was totally against ethanol. So for those people that care about ethanol, and it's a big deal actually for you.
Trump's also on the campaign trail in Iowa this week.
There's no way I can lose Iowa. Let's see what happens. I don't think so. We'd have to do some really bad things to lose at this point because we are. It's been amazing how far. It's the best polls we've ever had. Overall, nationwide, in Iowa, no matter where I go, it's the best polls because they love the 4 years.
The GOP field is still expanding, with former Vice President Mike Pence and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie expected to make announcements early next week. On the Democratic side, long-shot candidates Marianne Williamson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. have jumped in to challenge sitting President Biden. But as of now, the DNC is forgoing any primary debates between Biden and Democratic challengers. Jenna?
All right, thank you, Abigail. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a deal to raise the debt ceiling and avoid default passed the House with overwhelming bipartisan support. It's estimated to reduce the deficit by $1.5 trillion over the next decade, and it's now in the hands of the Senate. Both sides did not get everything they wanted, and some senators have already floated amendments before the vote's taken.
The Senate will stay in session until we send a bill avoiding default to President Biden's desk. We will keep working until the job is done.
The deal the House passed last night is a promising step toward fiscal sanity. But make no mistake, there's much more work to be done. The fight to reel in wasteful spending is far from over.
And if the Senate were to make any changes to the bill, it would have to be voted on again in the House, something House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Biden are hoping to avoid.
Well, Mark Hamrick is Washington Bureau Chief and a senior economic analyst for Bankrate. He joins us now. Mark, welcome. So Washington is known as Spin City. You have Speaker McCarthy touting this as the largest spending cut in American history. We know, though, both sides spin things. So can you, Mark, take the spin out of this and help us make sense of the deal?
John, well said. That was really my thought as well when I was hearing about some of this earlier in the day. It feels like a lot of politicians get Pelotons as Christmas gifts. holiday gifts. But the reality is that a catastrophe appears to have been avoided as long as the Senate follows along expectations and does pass this package. I don't think we should be talking about what an immense achievement this was, because really what it was avoiding disaster. And Mitch McConnell's right. We're far from a sustainable fiscal situation. The problem is that the vast majority of spending revolves around Social Security, Medicare, and the military, and this does nothing to rein in those commitments. But those are bigger problems.
Yeah. Mark, how are the markets reacting to the House passage of this debt deal?
That's been an interesting one, Jenna, because the markets, in terms of the stock market anyway, never really believed in the sense of careening in crashing fashion, in a sense that this isn't going to be worked out. And I guess they took history as a guide that, most often the debt ceiling is either suspended or raised, in this case suspended, so politicians can say they didn't raise it. That's the way things work. So I don't think that there's a tremendous relief just yet in financial markets, because as we put this issue aside, we still have the problem of the unsustainable path of the nation's federal debt and deficits, and we still have the same old problems that include high inflation, the Fed's working to get that under control or at least bring it down, and we still have an elevated risk of a recession. So it's just back to the old problems, not the one that we were most concerned about for any number of weeks now.
From the stock market, Mark, to the job market, last week jobless claims rose about 2,000 to 232,000. How do you read that?
Steady as she goes. It's quite remarkable, the resilience of the job market. Earlier this week, John and Jenna, we heard that the nation's job openings actually rebounded as of the latest count, so that we now have 1.8 jobs open for every unemployed individual. So among the blessings that we can count is the still robust, or at least stable, job market, even though we've had an elevated number of job cuts predominating in technology.
And then tomorrow we'll, of course, get the May jobs report. What are you expecting with that, Mark?
I think we expect it to be really stable. Many of the indicators coming into the report have indicated that should be the case. The consensus among economists, something shy of 200,000 jobs added on the month, perhaps just a tad less wage growth, and the unemployment rate really remaining close to historically low levels.
All right, Mark Hamrick with the Bank Rate. Always good to see you. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Well, we're starting to get a fuller picture of the devastation of the war in Ukraine. More than 500 Ukrainian children have died since Russia's invasion, according to the U.S. ambassador. Today, at the U.S. Air Force Academy graduation ceremony, President Biden emphasized America's continued support.
And the American people's support for Ukraine will not waver. We've always stand up for democracies, always.
Mr. Biden's remarks before the Fly, Fight, Win graduates in Colorado come amid renewed attacks on the capital, Kyiv, where one child and at least 2 others were killed in an aerial bombing by the Russian forces.
With that, let's bring in John Hardy, Russia Program Deputy Director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Great to have you with us this evening, John. So this fresh aerial bombardment from Russia comes as Ukraine prepares for a highly anticipated spring offensive with billions of dollars worth of weapon systems and ammunition from U.S. and Western allies. We are almost to summer. What is Ukraine's holdup here?
Well, I think the reason for the delay is, we had an unseasonably wet spring. So in this part of the world, the high water table, the ground can get very muddy, which impedes the movement of vehicles, especially heavier vehicles and vehicles that don't have tracks, vehicles that are wheeled. And I think also Ukraine wanted to wait until the last little bit of Western provided vehicles, other materiel trickled into the country, and as some troops finished up training on them. So I think Ukraine is at a point now where they're just about ready, and I'd expect the counteroffensive will commence really any day now.
John, this week the New Yorker published a dispatch from 2 weeks on the front lines detailing the plight of infantrymen in the trenches of Donbass. The report depicts a depleted front lines with few supplies and an intractable war. John, how does this all end? Is there an end in sight?
Well, I think the first step will be this counteroffensive. So we'll have to see how it goes. And my hope is Ukraine will be able to retake a significant chunk of territory. And then, from there, it'll be a decision in coordination with its Western backers about next steps. I think the counteroffensive, however it goes, will not end the war. And so from our vantage point in Washington, we need to be thinking about long-term theory of victory and not only increasing our production of weapons and other things that Kyiv needs, but also just thinking about, from our own position, how this war should end. Do we want to retake all territory that Russia took since invading last year? Is Crimea included in that? I think these are questions that we've sort of danced around as a coalition and really haven't begun to answer.
As we heard, President Biden is committed to this war. He says the U.S. will not waver. John, what do you make of that assertion?
Well, he's saying the right things. It's just what's his position going to be when he has to put his money where his mouth is, right? So, however the counteroffensive goes, where does he want to go from there? The questions I just raised about, is Crimea fair game? Do we want to support an ambition of that scale, which is certainly something Kyiv wants to do? These questions really have not been answered, and many of our European allies are starting to say, hey, we're going into this thing with really no coordinated strategy or end game about how this ends or how we get to where we want to be. So, those slogans are nice, but I think at some point we're going to have to actually come up with an actual strategy and communicate it to the American people.
All right, John Hardy with Foundation for Defense Democracies, thank you so much for being with us and your insights tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up, the first presidential campaign following the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Why some Republican candidates are avoiding the life issue and how that could cost them. Next. Welcome back. A major reversal this week in the fight over abortion. Oklahoma's Supreme Court ruled 2 laws passed last year that ban most abortions are unconstitutional. In a 6-3 decision, the state high court said pregnant women have the right to obtain an abortion in life-threatening situations. The ruling strikes down civil laws modeled off of Texas's law, enabling private citizens to sue any individual who performs or enables an abortion.
Well, ever since the Supreme Court overturned Roe and sent the abortion issue back to the states, some GOP presidential contenders are employing what's being called the Ostrich strategy. Essentially, they're hiding their heads in the sand on the issue of abortion.
They're ducking the life issue, knowing that it could cost them the 2024 election. CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody, explains the current challenges of pro-life politics.
Since the end of Roe, the abortion issue has become more complicated politically for the GOP. The lack of a cohesive message following the Supreme Court decision cost them some midterm races. Now, candidates must figure out how to be pro-life while also not turning off swing voters. Former White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany tells CBN News that it's been an overall passive strategy.
They never go on offense on this issue. They tend to hide from it rather than giving an optimistic and loving view for how we as a party treat life and the heartbeat and the child. But they always stay on their heels. They avoid the topic. And then when they do talk about it, they never go on offense and ask the left, where do you draw the line?
That often leaves Republican politicians, especially those running for president, facing questions about where they stand on a federal abortion ban. Their answers vary. President Trump supported a 20-week ban while in the White House. Now, as a candidate, he plans to negotiate the best deal.
Some people are at 6 weeks. Some people are at 3 weeks,
where's
2
President
weeks.
Trump?
President Trump is going to make a determination what he thinks is great for the country and what's fair for the country.
Recently, Trump suggested the 6-week abortion ban in Florida, signed by presidential candidate Governor Ron DeSantis, may have been too harsh, leading to a quick response.
I think that as a Florida resident, he didn't give an answer about would you have signed the heartbeat bill that Florida did. They had all the exceptions that people talk about. The legislature put it in. I signed the bill. I was proud to do it. he won't answer whether he would sign it or not.
From a political perspective, the squabbling over bans ranges from how many weeks to staying away from that part of the issue. GOP presidential candidate Senator Tim Scott supports a 20-week ban. And recently, GOP presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson told CBN News there's a reason the GOP should act at the federal level.
I would like to see this resolved at the state level. But I know the Democrats, if they get control of Congress, they're going to have a national abortion standard that opens up the floodgates for abortion. Republicans, if we actually win control of both houses, we have an opportunity to set a national standard on that. If Congress did act on that and it protected life and it had the appropriate exceptions in place, then I would sign that bill.
On that subject, Republican presidential contender Nikki Haley is taking a wait-and-see attitude. While staunchly pro-life, she says when it comes to a federal ban, you need to be realistic.
We've seen in Florida, Governor DeSantis support a 6-week ban in Florida. That's in Florida. Asa Hutchinson's in. He seems to be okay with a 15-week ban. But you're reluctant to kind of go there now. Is that accurate to say you're reluctant right now to go there?
Let's be honest with the American people. Let's be honest that no Republican can ban all abortions because we are not even close to 60 votes in the Senate. We're 45. We haven't had 60 in over 100 years. No Democrat can ban all these life laws that are happening in the states because they're not even close to 60 votes. So if we're going to talk about any legislation at the federal level, let's start with consensus.
National pro-life groups point to a clear consensus, citing polls that show more than 7 in 10 Americans oppose abortion after 15 weeks. That includes 75% of women and 70% of independents. Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony list, says the GOP needs to stop running away from the issue.
What is then the Republican strategy going forward specifically? You say can't be the ostrich strategy. What is the 30-second Reader's Digest pitch here?
I would be saying the 15-week minimum standard, yes, it isn't all that we want, but it is consensus in this country. And contrasted with your position, Democrat pro-abortion candidate, it is a winning issue every single time to contrast 15 weeks with unlimited abortion up into the end, paid for by taxpayers. That's what they ought to be saying.
Dannenfelser says that includes pro-life congressmen who supported a federal abortion ban before the Roe reversal. Now they see it as a states' rights issue, and she says that's not nearly enough.
What's your message to Republican senators and House GOP members as well?
Sitting back and waiting means death to children, and it means women don't get the love and service that they actually need. So if you're a senator and you say this is a states' rights only position, then the position of the pro-life movement is we cannot support you.
The nation will be watching how it all unfolds as we get closer to 2024. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
Children increasingly vulnerable to sexual predators on the internet. When we come back, why big tech is part of the problem.
Protecting children from online predators is key to keeping them safe, and one leader in the fight against sexual exploitation claims big tech is part of the problem.
As Charlene Aaron reports, the group is calling out to major companies, it says, facilitate, enable, and even profit from policies that put children at risk.
The list, dubbed the Dirty Dozen, exposes businesses that fail to protect children from sexually abusive content. The goal is to motivate consumers to call on corporations, government agencies, and other organizations to change their policies and practices.
Oftentimes, these are platforms that we use every day and might not realize that they have policies or practices that enable sexual harm.
Companies on the 2023 list include the Apple App Store, popular social media sites Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter, eBay, as well as the digital music service Spotify. Haley McNamara, vice president for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, wants parents to know how easy it can be for their children to be targets in their own home.
Some of these are on for issues like easy access of adults to children, which results in grooming and sexual abuse. One that might be particularly applicable to parents and surprising would be the video game and platform Roblox, which is used by millions and millions of children around the world. And unfortunately, it's very easy for predators to gain access to children on that platform. Other platforms are social media focused, such as Reddit and Twitter, where unfortunately there's a large amount of child sexual abuse material or adult non-consensual sharing of material as well.
She says while awareness is important, this Dirty Dozen list also serves as a tool for child safety activists with a track record of getting companies to change their ways.
While these are dark issues, there is so much hope because we have every year victories from the Dirty Dozen list. So in some recent ones include, we got Amazon to stop selling childlike sex dolls, which they were selling in the past. We've had progress from Walmart, the Department of Defense, Verizon, United Airlines, and so many other companies that have improved their policies thanks to people taking action through the Dirty Dozen list.
Moving forward, McNamara hopes for even more progress, especially when it comes to protecting those most vulnerable.
I really hope that we can have more responsibility put on technology platforms themselves to make their products safe or to turn products safety on by default, at least for children.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thank you, Charlene. An epic mission to space returns to Earth. Why this splashdown is just the beginning. Next.
All right, finally tonight, the 9-day trek to space is over, and the first Saudi woman in space says it's only the beginning.
The SpaceX capsule-carrying stem cell researcher Rayana Barnawi and now other passengers Wednesday splashed down safely off of the Florida Panhandle.
AX-2 is back on Earth. 6,000 feet.
Saudi Arabia picked up a multi-million-dollar tab for Barnawi and a Saudi fighter pilot to join other passengers embarking on the latest trip in commercial space travel. I'm telling you, if it's a multi-million-dollar tab, I think a lot of people are going to be priced out, Jenna. Not you.
No kidding. You know, honestly, even if the money was there, I don't think I'd want to.
You don't think you'd do it?
No, would you?
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Have a good night.